Welcome. I think probably most of my followers have heard of you, the internet historian who's published across various websites. You and I have talked, and I've been aware of your great work for like at least since 2020, I think.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's been a long time.
yeah. So, and we've done interviews before, but I've been so excited to follow all of your recent projects. I shouldn't say recent because some span back to 2023 of digital psychosis and spirituality overlap, as well as digital mental illnesses. And so I wanted to give you the floor if you had any you wanted to go into first that are pressing, because I know AI is really, really recent pressing stuff, because I took a ton of notes. So whatever you're feeling really passionate on your soapbox about lately, I am ready to track with that and dig into the psychology part.
Sure. I mean, I'm really curious to hear your take on the LLM induced psychosis because like for me it seems like first and foremost like a media literacy issue.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at a lot of, I mean, obviously there's this sort of like adjacent issue of for example, like people who have like a latent psychosis that it sort of acts as like a drug might or a stressful situation.
Yes.
Um, and we maybe aren't as sensitive or aware of how many people are suffering. But I also think that there's a lot of people who, um, a third party might think is getting one shotted or has chat GPT psychosis, but really it's like, to me, it feels the same as, somebody who doesn't have a lot of media literacy, seeing it, a barrage of TikToks for the first time or like getting exposed to QAnon, where they don't exhibit psychosis really. It's just that they don't understand that the LLM can be wrong. It's that basic. They don't know how to um they don't know how to check it. And I think like part of the, besides, I think I have just sort of a certain level of tech literacy just because of the work I do, but also I think like in my own usage, there have been times where I've believed things that are not true, where I've been flattered, but because I use it so often, I was able to realize like pretty quickly that if you ask, "Are you sure?" I used to talk about this a lot, like even like a year, as long ago as like a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. If you
Right.
ask ChatGPT and Claude, "Are you sure?" when you're talking about a personal issue, to this day it'll change its opinion, right? So there's certain like things that I think like is it's just an exposure issue too. Like they don't know how to navigate these tools. And I don't know if it's fair to call that mental illness or to say that. I think like the worst I've seen is some people describing it as catching a mental illness
Mm-hmm.
from the LLMs. And I'm obviously, for people who are familiar with my work, I'm very sympathetic to this idea that the media that you immerse yourself in shapes your perception. I think that's very true.
Yes.
But it's a spectrum, and there's a lot of nuance and a lot of distinctions in how it impacts you. And I think that it's very irresponsible to say that it's making people or somehow it has this forcing function, clinical psychosis. It just doesn't. I'm not a mental health professional, but it just doesn't make sense to me.
No, I'll jump in. You're exactly right. So I would agree. What people have to recognize about schizophrenia is there's a very heavy genetic component. And we know from twin studies, I think it's a 50% rate of one twin getting it if the other gets it. So, and there's also environmental stressors that can bring that out. I mean, there's a high incidence of schizophrenia, higher incidence in urban environments, and there's been conjecture about that, about is it chemicals? What is that? I mean, there's so much to schizophrenia and psychosis as constructs and as biological and psychological phenomena and the entanglement there, that if someone to blame AI with that, that's just what brings it out potentially. So, before it was AI and you wrote about it, it was television, it was radio, it goes that far back. The fundamental concept behind psychotic thinking, you could call it, is aberrant salience, which is a term meaning like your salience, your attention goes off in aberrant directions and makes patterns where most people, right, or neurotypical people probably wouldn't. And so, like, I've many psychotic clients I had before the advent of GPTs for consumer use involved, their movie-based connections they were making, people talking to them when really it wasn't their name or anything that would make that relevant. And so it's almost like, psychosis is this, if someone's already experiencing it, the AI becomes like what they orbit around and what continues that kindling effect. If you have a psychotic break, you're likely to have another one and another one, and it goes up. So it's what tool and what venue someone finds that then is like the tractor beam that further pulls them down that, and a mental hygiene terminology. So it becomes more, it's acceleration of that. And so that leads to tech literacy, as you're saying. People need to have better tech literacy. And when they have family and friends and therapists or psychiatrists who they can talk to about this and talk to before it goes down this rabbit hole of just decompensation and immersion, people can be caught before. But you hear these stories. I read about the person who, went downhill and committed homicide after they thought their story character had disappeared, that you had written about in your essay. And so all along the way, someone there who has a regular check-in with a caseworker or therapist, if they're comfortable talking about that, they can maybe try to do some redirection there and talk about that. But it's totally literacy, and it's totally what people are finding that feeds into that impulse. Like any mental illness where if you have BPD, then it's going to be leaning into they didn't text you back quickly, and then explosions and blowing up somebody's phone. And so all roads lead to the technology enabling quicker mistakes. And the frictionlessness, and I love that term, you use that, I love the term friction. The lack of friction makes mental illness accelerate at an exponential level.
I mean, I want to jump in here. I totally agree with like the vulnerability of people who have pre-existing mental illnesses. Like this is something I wrote about a long time ago, and it got on my mind because I was watching TikToks of a schizophrenic woman who believed that she was in a relationship with Johnny Depp in the astral plane, and she was like briefly sort of like like a micro celebrity. And I thought to myself, like, at the time, like character AI, which was used to have a lot more creative freedom, she's someone who would be very susceptible to being scammed or thinking that she's actually talking to Johnny Depp through this service. People with cognitive disabilities who may have like lower IQs or have Down syndrome or something like this. There's been a lot of studies done about how just the internet exacerbates different psychotic disorders. People who have psychotic disorders and of course who also have cognitive disabilities are at like higher risk of romance scams and different types of fraud. But something that I think that is not a distinction that is not made enough in this discourse is there's a huge chunk of people who are simply wrong. You know what I mean? Like they're perfectly functional, and it's not like they're high functioning with a psychotic disorder. It is not a clinical condition. And I'll just give an example from my own life. This is so embarrassing, but I think it's actually really illustrative. I thought someone had plagiarized me, and every now and then, I think every writer struggles with this. I have like once a year, once every 2 years or something, I'll develop a suspicion like this, that like, oh, just was someone biting my moves or something. And finally I was like, oh, well, AI is neutral. It has no reason, and this was like early, right? This was before I realized sort of the flaws. Like, it has no reason to gas me up. It will tell me if I'm imagining this, if it was maybe a zeitgeist thing, like what the probability is. And I really trusted that it would be able to tell me this. And it sent me down this rabbit hole of like, okay, this person didn't only copy me with this one essay, but they had a history of it and XYZ, whatever. And then finally I was like, this is ridiculous. This is really ridiculous. Like it's just off the LLM is off the rails. Like the chatbot is not giving me real information. Right. But I bought into it for 20-30 minutes. I was like getting mad. I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize how deep this problem even was. I thought it was just this one piece. And it turned out that in this particular instance, the person probably was inspired by me or something. And I was being immature. But was when I realized like, I really shouldn't be asking these types of questions because it doesn't have more information than I do in certain cases. And it isn't actually like a neutral tool that can like analyze two things. And also certain questions, even, aside from that, there are certain questions that you just can't ask because there is no clear answer unless it is like a copy paste hack job.
Right. Well, so as we're talking, I'm thinking like there's philosophers, and then there were the Sophists in ancient Greece, and the idea of like learning oratory and how to argue anything and how to just produce words. And I think LLMs in many ways are like digital Sophists, whereas people expect them to be like digital philosophers or sources of truth. And so they aren't really objective. They can give you, you can pin it down. You can say, are you sure? You can do different things. Everyone doesn't know that. I mean, the amount of people use technology out of the box and don't look up ever how to deepen your use of it's probably pretty staggering. As you said, a lot of people just don't know. And there's a lot of ignorance. And so you have to assume what is going to be the worst use case or the lowest denominator of behavior with apps. That's kind of my view on any app now is what's the worst that could go wrong with it is people start to lionize and revere it. And you have to think like somebody who has nothing else, what's your app going to do for them? And companies may or may not think of that. I mean, it doesn't, if everybody thought like that, their company wouldn't make $1 billion, or they know it's going to do that and it's going to make money because people will dump a lot of time into it. But the sad truth is that vulnerable people who are high anxiety or high, loneliness or don't have social skills are going to get into something. And so the higher the vulnerability, the more likely, as you brought up very well, like those romance scams back in the email days, the Nigerian prince emails. I mean, that's back in early email times. And so I think credulity, gullibility, desperation are all part of this cocktail that we have to talk about if we're going to start blaming technology.
Yeah, I mean, it's so like obvious to say it out loud, but we sort of do need data to back things up. But like erotomania was really exacerbated by social media. And there's also been studies on that. I mean, it's intuitive, and I think that's part of my problem with some of the discourse. Well, because it's sort of just like, like let's not like there are people who are already vulnerable. It's like you wouldn't want your like relative who has bouts of mania to get heavily involved in like a new age community or something for the same reason, or to start dabbling in meth. Right? There's just things that are like, some people will be like basically okay, even if harmed, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Not with the example of hard drugs, but, with like buying crystals or whatever. But your cousin who has a propensity to experience episodes of psychosis,
right?
It's different for them. And I think that conversation is much more salient and much more important than like, oh, well, you'll catch a mental illness if you overuse ChatGPT, because also it distracts from this like more important question of like, well, how do we develop media literacy, and how do we ask the right questions and construct the right prompts to use this tool that is very powerful, very confusing. Unfortunately, I feel many ways inevitable. There's this sort of reactionary instinct, I think, to abandon alt tech. And I think that that's romantic and all well and good, but the rest of the world isn't doing that. I think, the smart parts of the world will be strengthening their literacy muscle, and people who will get ahead, I think like Mary Harrington wrote this like wonderful op-ed for the New York Times recently about how thinking is going to become a luxury good, right? And this piece was about the very real issue of like, well, poorer families will give their kid the iPad for 2 hours a day because they just don't have the childcare bandwidth, whereas wealthier families can read to their children before bed and emphasize these skills. But sort of the missing ingredient there also is, and I think that op-ed was perfectly correct, but not only do wealthier families have a sort of screen-free environment at the critical moment, but they introduce screens at the critical moment too. And they will be able to build the skills that will make them employable. This is like a very rare point where I agree with Taylor Lorenz, who is like, no, like you don't want to make your child a Luddite because that's even more damaging than fire hosing them with Roblox 24/7. Well, maybe not more damaging, but it's not good.
Right.
We need to know how to use these tools with intention, and we need to know how they work, not just because it's a practical skill, but because I think, and my friend Clinton Ignatov has an entire blog dedicated to this. Knowing how these tools work is also how you protect your mind, you protect your mental health, and you can't necessarily, prevent a psychotic episode if you have a genetic propensity for that, or prevent it. But if it's just sort of the sycophancy that's making you believe that you were plagiarized when you weren't, or getting you into a negative thought spiral, or like like dysthymia as opposed to like a full blown depression or something like this, that you do have some agency over.
Yes. So like what happens is I like this term. Have you heard of what a Molech trap is?
No, I haven't.
So Scott Alexander coined that term. Essentially, it's a game theory sort of idea where everyone who acts rationally, you have to act rationally as an individual in your self-interest or take a hit, right? And when you act in your self-interest, it contributes to like a collective negative or destructive outcome. So a really good example of that is if you're at a concert and the seating isn't going upward, like you're flat and somebody stands up to see better over people, whatever, and then you have to do that, but the people behind you have to do it because they can't see. So basically, and I like that metaphor now, before I kind of call it arms race, where if you're not using the technology and you're a Luddite, you're going to fall behind. So you're going to have to take on the risk of whatever that is, but be cognitively hearty and resilient enough to take it. So, I mean, GPT is amazing. ChatGPT, LLMs are amazing at collating research and of stuff that exists and that, you know, like you can fact check it and say, okay, does this size up? But it's amazing for that. That's really what I enjoy it for. If you write it off completely, you're going to get behind in whatever technological arms race or just tools that make things easier. So I think you're completely right on that. And also there's that great Onion, I think it was, meme of father gives daughter obsolete media, ensuring she can't connect with peers. And it's like a vinyl. Remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's what I think of too, is it's like, are you ready for your kid? I mean, I think that's how it is with social media and narcissism. And so when you get on social media, you're going to do narcissism. You're going to go on there and self-promote. And there's a certain Overton window of how much that's considered appropriate for age, and it's age gated, basically. And then when you get outside that, you're hit with the scarlet letter of narcissists. It's very interesting to me. Reading your articles made me think about that. Like when you divide the subcategories of extremely online people, one thing, and I want to get to that, but when we talk about people who are vulnerable to LLMs or misusing them for romance partners, and or that's fine, people can do that if they want. But if it deepens their isolation, or if they start believing something fantastical and are violent, I think that they would probably be already wanting to run away from body sensations. You wrote about that in the online disorder article. You wrote about people wanting to connect with the body, and that's why so many body focused things are coming in. And when I did research on digital dissociation during COVID with Zoom meetings, people reported in studies that they felt more disconnected from their body and they reported higher negative emotion. And so I think there's a lot to that, where people who already have anxiety and are uncomfortable in their own skin are going to turn to dissociation tools like now LLMs or anything else they can get their hands on, literally, that gets them out of discomfort, but it deepens disconnection. So I wondered if you kind of noticed that same pattern. It's like a kindling. It's a loop.
Something sort of controversial, I believe, related to this is with the AI companions. I don't think it's necessarily negative for all people. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people who I think, why not?
Right. No, I get that. Same
yeah, and there's also, and I also think there are a lot of people who would have had similar relationships with media if it wasn't going to be a chatbot. And mm-hmm. I mean, I do think you're right that it's escapism for a lot of people. But I think there is a small population where it's like, I don't think they're hurting anyone, including themselves. And it's like, who am I to cast aspersions on that? Like what, just they let them do it, and in fact, they're probably in some cases better off.
Yeah, I like that because it kind of dovetails with the phenomenon of femcells and incels, but I know femcells have been like a really big topic that you've wanted to get the record straight on, because people will say they don't exist, which is false. Like, especially as you've talked about, like in your TikTok, that in the past it was definitely more prominent, or like there's a whole. Do you think that this overlaps the femcell community? Like, if they're better off with a chat with an LLM boyfriend?
No, I mean, like, what I'm thinking of, there's two types of people who I think maybe in a sense are better off. Like, there's one guy who, I've sort of been in vague contact with, and I think like this is where like guardrails would really help. But he, he's disabled and he has an AI girlfriend, His disability prevents him from having a physical world romantic relationship that's more ordinary and mundane. He uses this technology. He's satisfied by it. He's happy. He feels like he's able to work sort of this creative muscle. And again, like that's probably more rare, but like I think that's like first of all, I think in his particular case, it's healthier than a parasocial relationship with, let's say, an OnlyFans creator or a sex worker.
Yeah.
He doesn't just get romantic satisfaction from it, but he gets a level of creative and imaginative satisfaction from it. Is it uncomfortable in some ways for people who aren't used to it? Is there an element of tragedy to it? Yes, but is it more tragic than him being alone? Is it more tragic than him saving up to see a sex worker once a year? Is it more tragic than him reading a literary erotica alone? You know what I mean? Like there's a
Yeah.
lot of situations like that which we don't want to talk about in sort of polite society, but I think okay, that's extra incentive, I think, to put some guardrails to make sure that chatbot then doesn't turn around and tell him to commit suicide or something. Like make sure the safety is there, but I would much rather see that individual enjoy his, have his quality of life improve. And so that's one type. And then there's another type of person who I think has a parasocial relationship with chatbots, and it's very similar to the relationship that some people might have with a K-pop star or a fictional character.
Sure.
And to that I say is that already existed. It's a new expression of it. Who cares? Like not who cares, but like it's like we're not, that's been in our culture for so many hundreds of years. What the concern should be is like, are they safe? Like what kind owns the intimacy? Is there maybe like an incentive to like if there was a discovery that these chatbots like purposely were upsetting people or picking on their insecurities to keep them on the app,
Yeah.
then that's a concern to me. But the act itself is, one, I think very familiar, and two, I think helpful for certain like rarefied populations of people. And I don't know if it's as dystopian as people think.
Yeah, I don't know that it is either. And as you're talking, I think of kind of the spicy point that it would be better if people who are high in psychopathy or narcissism could act some of that out digitally or remotely. But the irony there is they enjoy the human element in a negative
Right.
way, I think. So I think that would just not be where they would want to put that energy. That's a good point. I think if people who want to get better at socialization had an AI bot that would even help them develop some competencies in that, but in a more sensitive way where it wasn't like harsh rejection, that could be cool. But I get what you're saying, like for people who that's just the option. And isn't
Right.
that okay? Because what is society offering in its place? I'm a big proponent of having those kind of conversations.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think like especially with AI companions, there's a lot of like we just don't know how to think about it. And we don't really know who's using it because the reporting has to have an interesting narrative hook as opposed to looking at more ordinary use cases. What were these people doing before? Also, I think is a very good question. Do I think like that there are people whose lives are harmed by it? I think yes, because it reminds me again of like, people who get swept up on Facebook. It's probably a lot of boomers. I would be more concerned with older people than younger people is another thing.
Right.
Something that I was thinking about and writing a little bit about today. I haven't published it yet, but I think that we might also see an interesting thing where we're always we're always clutching our pearls of like, think of the children and like a 7-year-old, yes. But let's say a 13 or 14-year-old who's using this technology, they might have a better native fluency than someone who's my age, right? Where it's like, someone who's my age might be more susceptible to being fooled or defrauded in some way, whereas a 14-year-old might have more intimacy with some of this technology and be able to conceptualize it better and may actually use it more productively ultimately, even if not right now.
No, I love that. I mean, that reminds me of kind of when people who are older get caught up in AI generated Facebook scams, or like the memes of like, can someone wish me a happy birthday? And it's a kid that like has wooden legs or something and they're not real.
Yeah.
It's like people who are closer to the technology, who develop almost an immunity to it, who are younger and kind of seeing the rise of it, they have more immunity. So I totally get that. I also think that it just, when you talked about when you wrote the tulpa in your pocket article, I thought it was interesting because you talk a lot about I thought that it was very similar, the new language, the new ways that people have to deal with AI and learn how to communicate and prompt it. It's very similar to just dating apps where you have to learn how to communicate and how to say things that get attention and what to do that gets you where you want to go. Like any new technology requires a certain learning curve like that.
Yeah, I think that's true, and we're not always happy. We're not always happy with it. I think dating apps are kind of on the way out. I wonder if do people still use them? Really, it feels like they don't.
So I think because, and this is also very interesting, I think as the narrative has shifted to it being they're being more loathed and people making fun, and you can do something publicly while privately, you can say publicly you don't like them while privately using them, but it's almost like now it's become so commonplace to dislike them and maybe tell other people that they're bad, that as you've written about, like the return to IRL, I think I'm seeing that. And I think people crave that because they can see all of the ways that online dating is limited and encourages, again, kind of bad faith behavior. Whoever X's out first or unmatches, like, might not get an algorithm hit for being the person who was undesirable to talk to, right? It algorithms bad acting and bad behavior in many ways. And so as people develop literacy, they may want to opt out of certain more manipulative frameworks. That's my view on why people are exiting, or maybe just cumulative bad experiences.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things I wrote on my Substack was like, I think like the micro rejections, especially on dating apps, accumulate and impact you. And I wrote that in a period where like I was noticing a lot of people were following me on Twitter. And this was 2019, just to be clear to listeners.
Yeah.
And I was like, why am I getting so bent out of shape out of this? And it's like, well, even if they're strangers or acquaintances, if this is happening to me 20 times, 50 times, 100 times, once or twice, who cares? Even 5 times, who cares? It's just social media. But if it happens to you a bunch, eventually it wears on you and you start to ask questions.
Yeah, I like that you bring that up. I really enjoyed that piece by you because so one of the things we have clinically is the idea of developmental trauma. So there's PTSD from being assaulted or war experiences or moral injury, we could call it. And so people know that. And then there's complex PTSD, which we could do a whole thing on that. That term gets bandied around quite a bit, not always properly. But so developmental trauma and complex trauma are kind of interchangeable. They were both proposed to be disorders back in the 90s, and they've been in this kind of limbo. And then now I think the ICD-10 or one of those diagnostic frameworks honor it, but then not really mainstream billing, I don't think, in America. It's a whole thing. But if you look at developmental trauma criteria, part of that is unstable, unapproving home life. And it's like, well, if you have unstable, unapproving relationships and you have tons of micro rejections, what does that do? We already know that it can be very damaging, right? From the anxious generation, even though that's not really purely on dating stuff. It's way more about social media in teens and young adults. But you have to wonder, like, because you wrote, I think it was almost quoted verbatim, it would be like, we aren't built for rejection the scale. Well, I don't think so. I think that's totally accurate.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, we don't really, I think maybe you know this about me. I've liked the anxious generation itself, but a lot of the sort of like aftermath marketing for it, I haven't liked. And I think it's because instead of, instead of going into points like this of like, there's constant like micro tears or something,
right,
in your ego, there's a huge, I find that height like continuously emphasizes that like individual Zoomers are broken, or they are narcissists, or they're in like a narcissistic culture. And it's weird because I like agree with many of his premises and even some of his solutions, but I feel like he's using the tools of the algorithm, I guess, to be heard. And it's like, I don't like thinking of it as like, well, every single Zoomer has been turned into this like narcissistic mess where all they can think about is, taking selfies and their own follower accounts and whatever. I mean, I'm sure that's true of some people, but it just like feels like a very insensitive lens to view it through.
Yeah, I think many Gen Z, I think this goes back to what you just said a few minutes ago, that the younger people are getting the literacy and more the immunity. I think they'll do social media and there's certain things you do on it, and then in person it's not the same way. It's not, it's kind of performative in a way. So I think the metaphors we use about them and where they come from matter a lot. So our early Facebook, it's like, this is, digital friendship. I think in early technology, and you might have touched on this before, that the kind of metaphor was, it's like the same as real life, just computer. And I think as we've gotten further and like one whole generation into social media, people are recognizing, well, it isn't that. It's more for publicity. It's more for popularity. It's more a tool to get traction for whatever project you have. If it's trying to get famous on TikTok with your music, or trying to gather your friends together for something, or get eyes on something that's activism, whatever it is, it's a tool for that. It's not a one-to-one digital friendship simulator. It's not like Tron. It's not the metaphors of the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s of it's you but a computer. There's a distance there and a detachment that's not going away. So when you think of it that way and it's more of a tool and you laugh about it, it probably is better for mental health.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I also something that's interesting is Zoomers get criticized a lot for wanting to be content creators as a career.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like it's not so much they want to be content creators because they think it's easier or they think that it'll make them famous and thus special. I think it's like it appears to be the only job left.
Okay.
It's the only job that like it's like kind of clear how you do it and get successful. It's not really this black box mystery, whereas like an ordinary office job kind of does feel like some people get them, some people make $180,000 a year, most don't. Like there's like no one really knows what's up, what's down.
Yeah.
But with being a content creator or like a micro celebrity or something, you kind of know what to do. And there's like like some people will fail. But it's some people will fail in the same sense that like some people become software engineers and they tap out at $100K a year. Some people become software engineers and suddenly Mark Zuckerberg's offering them $250 million buyout, right? That's
Yeah.
but they like know how to do it. And I think I hadn't thought about that until this conversation.
No, that's really good. I mean, it gets into what did people think about earlier careers as well, with someone wanting to hedge their bets on that, like becoming a star. People are going to go for it, and maybe they go and build a different kind of career in Hollywood, and they're like a character actor, like the people who show up in a ton of movies and you don't know their name, but you know their face. There's different paths to there. And along the way, you're probably going to learn things that are domain independent, where like critical thinking, if you want to be a micro-influencer on certain things, you might have to actually develop skills, even in stuff like makeup or get ready with me videos. If you then port that over to makeup artistry or something, I mean, if you look at it curiously and not just critically, there's more that can be gained from what it takes to be a content creator than just if you hit it as big as Mr. Beast.
Yeah, and I think like most people don't want to be Mr. Beast, or like to the extent that they do, it's like, again, just to use the tech example, it's like, oh, I want to be Steve Jobs. I mean, like, in your heart of hearts, you're not going to be Steve Jobs. It's just kind of like, right. Well, why not shoot for the stars or shoot for the moon and land on the stars?
Yeah, no, I get that. That's a great point. I mean, so I wanted to ask you about really where you got the ideas and the thought processes behind your internet exposure syndrome and the three really great subtypes there. Because I think actually the borderline one plays well into the influencer thing and people, but just that would be an awesome topic.
Yeah, I don't know really. I think it's something that I've been writing about on my blog for 5 or 6 years now. So internet overexposure syndrome is like a little theory that I have of like the insults people levy online are actually referring to behavioral archetypes. And we're so over therapized with our language that some people actually think that they have these conditions, but they don't. It's just the way their media environment has shaped them. And the three archetypes are the autist, the schizotypal, and the borderline. And this was sort of a difficult piece in some ways because I think people thought that I was saying that you can get BPD from being online too much, or they were thinking that I thought there was only 3 modes of being or something. But no, what I'm saying is there are 3 ways that being problematic internet use, so people who are like not ambiently online 14 hours a day, but they're truly online for that amount of time, right? They're online nonstop. Ways it can shape your thinking and change your perception. And it superficially looks like different, in two of the cases of personality disorder, and then in one case autism. And also it shows up in our insults, like we call people autists, we call them schizos, everyone's BPD now. They aren't like clinically significant, but they have sort of the texture or flavor of these personality disorders.
Yeah. I really like that, because when we look at, and you use the literal word hypervigilance when you describe the borderline archetype, where there's tons of anxiety, there is a lot of vigilance on how people respond, and just noticing the pattern of other people's texting behaviors or whatever, and how that instability in all of the emotion from online communication and contact even becomes identity based. I like that, because if we look at trauma, like if someone responds with hypervigilance or withdrawal or singular focus on survival during a traumatic incident, then we consider that adaptive because they survived. It's only after that situation ends and the person still hangs on to that frame, it's like they can't downshift or shift gears, then it's the problem. And so when you posit this as adaptations, I think the only problem is when people can't gear shift out of that, and when it bleeds into, almost like in role game theory of like character bleed, your character online starts to bleed into real life, then you have a problem.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I put it in the piece, that it's like they can't switch gears, and like what makes it internet overexposure, makes it like a syndrome, right? Or like, something worth naming, is that their main mode is online, and it makes sense in this new and abusive even environment, if you want to call it that, or traumatic environment, but it doesn't make sense in the physical world, and so it looks like something that it's not.
Right. I think especially with pattern recognition and hyperfixation in the autist subtype. I mean, before that, I think there was a tweet from Owen Cyclops about people who now spend hours in video games would have like cataloged all the rare bugs in the past.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that kind of gets to that. Like what it is it's the direction of someone's personality it's accelerated with the internet. And so if somebody gets hyperfixated, whether they have autism tendencies or ADHD, right? Hyperfixation can be a part, and like special interest. And so just where does that get pointed, and how do people perceive that? Why is it a negative thing? As you said earlier about AI companions, what makes it negative is some kind of valence someone has on values, like, oh, you should be doing that in the real world. Well, why? Because that's real. It's like, well, it's been about 30 years of the internet being real. So you could easily make that argument too.
Right. And I think with some of them, like with the autist archetype in particular, that one is most clearly like very useful online and not useful in the physical world, or less differently useful.
Sure. Well, so you got me thinking a lot about how romance may change, and how information gathering and remembering and data collection can spill over, and what that will look like. I mean, will that become almost a love language? Will that become something that carries? I can't see how it wouldn't, to an extent, if that becomes how you think romantic.
Yeah, I'm very curious about how our relationships are going to change. In some ways, I think that that normies are returning to, well, let me pause. With age verification, the way the internet's changing, I wonder if actually like we'll end up getting off social media long term, and then AI will sort of just be integrated into our appliances or something.
Ooh, that's a good idea. Okay. It's almost like we had this long for my life, for how much of it's taken, but not in the scheme of universe, like period of baby steps up to AI, and then AI is just it.
Yeah.
Like it was kind of hypothesized to be for previous generations.
Like maybe I think the social media era is maybe over. It's sort of switching gears a little bit.
Please.
I keep telling myself that I don't experience time too quickly, but then like I keep realizing that like February feels like it was yesterday. Like actually time is moving really quickly.
Yes.
I was in like major denial that like COVID took anything from me, because I think to
Yes.
imagine that like lockdowns took something from me is actually very painful. So I've been like doing like these mental acrobatics, and then it's like, we're almost done with 2025. What am I talking about? Time moves so quickly. 2019 feels like it was 2 minutes ago. In that time period, I so much has changed. I've lived in four different states. It's just like so much is.
Yeah.
I can't believe it.
Yeah. No, it's tough. And I mean, it's very interesting because during COVID, I did a lot of research in the moment to do more. I made more time to do video and social media. And at the time, I wasn't on Substack yet, but Twitter and different things. And so I was researching about COVID, how it impacted people, because I was getting tons of questions about that as a therapist. People were losing track of time easily then because the days were so similar that they weren't remembering what happened in different days because there was nothing to demarcate it or make one day more interesting than the next. And that like blew my mind to think about, because that I think that also overlaps why people who are depressed and they start isolating and getting into a sameness routine, like they're doubling down on how bad their memory and focus and view of things is, because it really is just the same and they really aren't thinking of anything different. And they think, what did I do recently? Oh, nothing. I think COVID was, and I know this wasn't really the point you were making, but I think COVID was really I don't think it was a generational trauma impacting a generation. And it'll be interesting to see. Well, I think that led to a huge change. And I keep seeing on Twitter, and you probably do too, it's probably on Substack, that there's been a massive change in social etiquette and people's overall demeanor. And I don't know how anecdotal it is, because I could steel man the opposition argument and say, well, maybe it's just that now that you call that out, it's like the availability bias of starting to notice all the white cars. Like, boy, there are a lot of white cars. Well, I wasn't noticing it before somebody said that. But I think there might be something to it. I don't know if you've noticed that as well, that social.
I've totally noticed it, and that's part of my anger, I guess, with it's the phones rhetoric. I mean, I have a very complicated relationship with that line. I like really flip-flop on it. But also It's like, it's the phones because we were on lockdown. Like, it's actually weird. So part of my brand and my story is I've always been very online, and that's true.
Yes.
But I became, even for me, who was already, my screen time was like 10 hours a day or something. I became more online and more intimately online during COVID in a way that and I forget, it's now like, if it took like half of my brain before, it's like now it occupies like 75%.
Yeah. No, I think it was that slope for a lot of people. I think, and I'm not getting political. I'll give a disclaimer, even though I probably don't need to. In 2025, I think people get spicier now, which is another cultural shift. I mean, I saw Gutfeld was on Jimmy Fallon, and he made Fallon's ratings go up, and there was a whole article I was reading about that, people lamenting it. But I think that when you tell people socialization is dangerous and optional and it's okay, just go isolate, a lot of people internalize that. And it's like, you can think of socialization and social interactions as kind of additive or optional. And really, when you think of it that way, I think it does something almost like a cognitive hazard or an info hazard. Like when you start to think of everything very instrumentally, it makes you potentially more detached, almost like an acquired, not sociopathy, but acquired indifference or apathy towards socialization. I know I'm making a leap. I'm not saying that's exactly what happened with everyone, but I think
it happened to a lot of people. And
Yeah.
I was so when COVID first started, I was very, very scared. And I loosened up because I had a roommate. I mean, I actually lived in a studio apartment. And then I took on a roommate voluntarily because I was too afraid to get on an airplane, but I knew I couldn't be alone. So my roommate just didn't even believe COVID was real. I never got that far down the rabbit hole, but and at some point I just copied my roommate and just started socializing normally. And I remember I was visiting a friend of mine, in San Francisco, and we were walking through the Mission, and even though it was like a normal like socialization with this person and it was a fun time, and I remember what we did and what we talked about, it felt like we were in this like weird dream because no one else was socializing. And then like every other time I socialized, like I have another memory of going to a friend's birthday party, and it's just like, it's so surreal because it's just like all of these memories of like, it's like everything's closed. We're like wandering the streets. There's like one homeless guy and a dog. It's just like this sort of dystopian thing.
It was.
and it's so like while I was just sort of saying like fuck you to the rules and socializing anyway, even the people who did that, it was so dreamlike and in such a haze that it had to have some kind of effect. Like there was no way to escape it.
Yeah, I remember my quarantine pod, which is such a term, was my brother and our friends, and we would watch like funny TikTok compilation videos, and we would walk around parks, and we would go wherever was open, and it would be everybody would be so distant, and it would just be it was like this quest to keep things going normally, but then there's this sense of almost sadness at seeing how abnormal the quote normal was.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of walking outside, and there was a lot of very dreary, dreamy and ethereal type of weird. It was like being in a lo-fi EDM chill beats to listen to video, like with how much you had to do outside. And I was in Colorado at the time. And so there was a lot of beautiful nature, but it was open and empty. So very interesting. But I think that something happened with that where I think the younger people were at certain times it probably affected differentially. I mean, if that was the norm, I mean, people didn't get to graduate. It was like, okay, get over it. It's like, it'd be interesting to see the way friendships and rites of passage are conceptualized by people years from now when they really or even now as they reflect on that.
Yeah. I have a friend who's 6 years younger than I am and was in college at the time. And her last 2 years of college were spent during lockdown and basically online. She ended up going to grad school just to sort of make up for that lost time.
Mm-hmm.
But we were getting dinner the other day, and I kind of had this thought. I feel bad because maybe she's watching this for all I know. But I'm sorry if you are. But I had this thought, like she seems very young, like for her age, and there's something sort of immature about her. Obviously, still very interesting and pleasant to be around. But I'm like, but then as I was thinking, I was like, why does she seem like she's 26, 27? Why does she seem like a baby, like even a teenager in some ways? And it could be a positive in some ways. There's a joie de vivre, but there's also like a lack of understanding of adulthood that I felt like at that age I had. And I was like, oh well, like I had the benefit of finishing college and then going out in the real world and working shitty jobs and being broke and it wasn't only like that socialization, but also like now it feels like a privilege in a way where it's like my rent was $650 and I would like scrape together change basically to get Dunkin' Donuts, and it felt like a treat. And then really working hard to go from that lifestyle to like proper like white collar work, which still wasn't making a ton, but it was like there was a lot more like it was much more dignified than $650 a month in a smelly old house in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, that is a really good point. I think that's like a healthy game element to life of like you're leveling up and there's that long-term gratification. You see a trajectory there. I think to loop it back in, I think that whole impulse of, well, I'm going to be a content creator, like what jobs are stable? I wonder how many people give into that now. And it's like, well, why try? I see a lot of that narrative. And I also see a lot of very willful and sort of unabashed youthfulness in my profession. Younger therapists call themselves baby therapists now. And I was testing that term out. Oh, seriously, Google, you're going to want to see this. It's a whole thing.
It's like you see with everything, baby witches, baby Christians, baby, baby writers, like everything is baby. And it's like, you're not a baby. Well, I also had a weird thing where like I always felt older than I was.
Okay.
And
I get that.
And then, so this is something, maybe this is so sort of off topic and off. I always felt older in the physical world. And then when I became sort of an online personality, like people have thought I'm still not 35. And I've been like accused, not that there's anything wrong with being 35, but people have thought I was 35 and older, since I was like 23 or something. And it's just like, so I feel like I've never identified with like being baby anything, being too young, the youngest one in the room, because whether it was like my internal sort of sense of things, so that, the oldest kid, whatever, or it was just like people just always projected olderness onto me.
Yeah, it's like a precocious thing. I remember like I didn't really feel young. I had a lot of energy, but I didn't feel young early 20s or in grad school. Because I felt like, okay, this is serious. There was something that kind of put me in that mode. And it's like, So then out of grad school, and when I had my clients, it's like, oh, you're a younger therapist. And so I got trained in EMDR and do a lot of that stuff. It's like, okay, have the technical skills when you don't have the experience, and then build both, right? Build experience and get even better. So, but now I feel a lot younger than my contemporaries. I'm like, because I like to be curious. I like humor. So it's like all along whatever age spectrum I am, I feel a little bit different in some way where I'm pulling up some other.
Well, I was gonna ask. Like, I feel in some ways I feel very old, but in other ways it's like I have friends who, you know, like the friend I just mentioned. She does. This isn't the case with her, but I have other friends in that age bracket, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, this is what it's like being 28, and my back hurts." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? What the hell are you talking about?" Like, you know, I've got some years on you, and I don't feel like my bones are disintegrating or whatever, you know, or like I need to stay in at night, or, you know.
People get so captured by that stuff. I mean, it's all like very mimetic. And I know, yeah, okay, back issues, sure. Maybe that's on the rise along with sedentary culture, obviously. But I think there's a lot to that. I mean, I think people who feel older when they're younger probably are observing and taking in so much that they just don't relate to the way a lot of people think. And so, but the lionization of youth, I think that's always, it's really boomer to hate on that, I know, and to say, oh, you know, young people think they're so smart. But I have noticed the affectations that you're talking about, behavior, the signifier, the embodiment of that youthfulness, and kind of the, so if 30's the new 20, then I mean, is 20 the new 10? Like, it doesn't really.
It's weird that we occupy both. And I remember, and this is so toxic, but I really think it was the culture, and I think it still is the culture. When I was 23, 24, I felt very old. Like, I felt like, and I even felt that way a little bit at 20 or even 19. And then, you know, I'll go back and sort of ask myself, like, well, if that's old, what did I think the right age was? And I realized, I think a lot of people are raised to think 16, 17 is when you're supposed to get everything done, and when you're the prettiest and most athletic, and when you can learn a language and all of these things. And that's like very toxic, and I think Zoomers still have that. And I feel very blessed that I didn't like then internalize it. I obviously did internalize it a lot, but I didn't internalize it then to think that I'm like literally in the grave in my 30s. But I think that's where a lot of it comes from. There's this, it's not just the lionization of youth, it's this idea that the only time when you're really alive is when you're in high school. And I think that also has a lot to do with our media, because the most interesting stories are taking place in high school.
I think there's a creepiness to that too. It's like, you know, I think it's valid if people want to work out their past trauma through young adult fiction, write about like when they're only wondering about high school and all that, and that's great. But it's like, for many people, high school wasn't their best time. And that's fine.
The irony is, if you like look at whether it's television shows or even, you know, YA, these aren't the issues of young people or teenagers. They're also not being portrayed by teenagers. Like, they're being portrayed by 25-year-olds. Like, a lot of these TV shows that I think give us the idea that high school is when we're supposed to peak, you know, are 15-year-olds being played by 25-year-olds.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Absolutely. I never watched Grease start to finish, to be honest. But I think of that, and then I've read the ages, like, you know, how I'll have like BuzzFeed be like the age of the actors, and it's like, man, they weren't even trying. That was like, it looked like just adults going to some kind of like a grad school or something, but dressed like teenagers. Like, it was just so obvious everybody was really grown up. And I get that there's like a Broadway element. It's like, yeah, we know it's acting, but I mean, that's very telling about that. It's like you have the skill and maybe the look that people want for high schoolers when you're 25. Like, that's so recurrent. Like, there's something to that that's very odd.
Yeah. But yeah, it is creepy to wrap it up.
This is great. Anything you want to plug or throw out there now?
You can follow me at default_friend on X. All my other social media is listed on my blog, default.blog.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is great.
Right. Thanks. Have a nice night.
Seeing you out there. Bye.
Right, bye.